There's a Victorian house in Denver that belonged to one of the most remarkable women in American history, a woman whose name is forever linked to the Titanic. But Margaret "Molly" Brown was so much more than a legendary survivor. She was a philanthropist, an activist, and a driving force for social change in the early 20th century. And every December, her home transforms into a Victorian Christmas time capsule, featuring authentic vintage Christmas decor, layered greenery, shiny lights, handmade trimmings, and turn-of-the-century touches that feel both traditional and nostalgic. Today, we're stepping inside the Molly Brown house to explore each room, each piece on display, and all of the festive touches the museum has added for the holiday season. I'll be pointing out original pieces belonging to the Brown family, the Titanic artifacts connected to Molly Brown's story, and the personal details that reveal who she really was, beyond the legends. Hi, I'm Allie, and welcome back to Fab Little Dish, where we celebrate vintage homes, timeless design, and the stories that keep their history alive. This is the only channel where we take a deep dive into the design details that make these homes so unique and special. So make sure to hit subscribe and check out my other house tours on this channel, featuring historic homes across the country and then some. Make sure to also hit thumbs up if you love historic house tours and the stories that keep them alive. Now let's head to Denver, Colorado to explore the unsinkable Molly Brown house, all decked out for the holidays. This house was built in 1889 and designed by architect William Lang, one of Colorado's leading Victorian architects. In 1894, Margaret and JJ bought the home for about $30,000, which was a fortune at the time. By 1898, the title was transferred to Molly, a telling move, perhaps reflecting their progressive worldviews and her rising independence. This is a Queen Anne-style home, which you can immediately see right away in its asymmetrical design. The textured mix of sandstone and red brick, the bay window, and all those little details that give the facade so much charm. And I love the size of this front porch and the swing they've added here. It's a perfect welcome before stepping inside. This entrance hall to the Browns' home does exactly what all Victorian main entrance halls are designed to do: impress. It's decorated for Christmas now, but when the Browns lived here, it still would have felt just as dramatic. Along the lower half of the walls, you have dark polished oak, wainscoting and trim, which immediately makes the space feel grounded and formal. You can see the ornate oak staircase rising up towards the second floor, framing the view with the carved details and leading your eye right toward the stained glass on the stairwell, which pulls in this soft, warm light that instantly makes the whole space glow. The walls are covered in a textured Anagalapta wallpaper that was applied over the plaster and then painted over in a warm gold. So the pattern is actually part of the house itself, which makes the place feel that much more layered and textured. That gold tone was very intentional as well. It's a subtle nod to JJ's tremendous gold strike and the success that made this house possible. The drawing room was the Browns' social space, the room where guests were welcomed, music was played, and also a favorite space for Margaret's daughter Helen to play with her dolls. The room is beautifully decorated for a traditional Victorian Christmas, with stockings hanging from the fireplace, handmade trimmings, and presents under the tree. There's even a fun display about the history of Christmas lights, featuring some of the first mass-produced lights in America. It gives you a real sneak peek at exactly what Christmas would have looked like as technology was evolving. There's also a symphonium disc music box, the kind that was widely popular between the 1880s and 1920s, a reminder that before gramophones and radios, this is what filled homes with music. Over by the piano, the museum has several Titanic-related artifacts on display that trace Margaret's experience after the disaster. There are newspaper clippings calling her a heroine, a title she often felt uncomfortable about, along with letters she wrote and received and fundraising checks connecting to her work with the Titanic Relief Fund, which raised money for the families of crew members who were lost at sea. The flag you see here is a reproduction of the Titanic crew presentation flag, originally gifted to Margaret in recognition of her support. And to the left, there are more items, a souvenir she bought in Cairo right before boarding the ship. It was in her pocket and also survived the disaster, which I find just fascinating. There's also the Carpathia's Survivor Medal, which she helped present to the crew of the RMS Carpathia for their heroic rescue of Titanic survivors. Such an incredible time capsule of a sad tragedy, and one that allowed Molly Brown to have a voice during a time when that was incredibly difficult for women to have. And just look at the stained glass above the front window. It matches the window on the staircase landing, intentionally tying the spaces together. The library is really the first room where you start to understand who the Browns really were, a family shaped by travel, curiosity, and education. These floor-to-ceiling bookcases say that immediately. They collected books on art, music, languages, history. She genuinely believed education opened the world. For Christmas, the library has this charming, nostalgic display of vintage ornaments, including original shiny bright sets from the early 1940s and 50s. You'll see classic pastel bulbs, reflector ornaments, bell-shaped ornaments, even early clear window packaging that stores used once shopping in person became more popular than mail-order catalogs. It feels just like stepping into a mid-century holiday catalog, with tabletop trees decorated exactly the way families would have done in the post-war era. And just look at these two carved plaques that originally belonged to the Browns, purchased during one of their many trips to Europe. I actually have a pair available on my shop that these remind me of. This is something I very much can relate to Margaret on, which I'm also seeing as a pattern throughout the museum. Just really how much of her interior design style was shaped by her travels. Let me know in the comments how your travels have helped shape your personal style over the years. I feel like that's something Molly would have wanted me to ask here. This is J.J. Brown's study, where he managed his extensive mining business. It's definitely a quieter space tucked away back here. This roll-top desk is also a great piece, which is original to the period. You'll see sets of copies of mining papers spread out across the surface, including documents tied to the Little Johnny mine, the gold strike that changed everything for this family. I love that the museum staged it this way. It feels like he just stepped away for a moment. Along the ceiling line, you'll notice something really special, a strip of original wallpaper discovered during restoration. The fragment below is authentic to the room, and the piece above it is the museum's reproduction, carefully matched to bring the space back to what it would have looked like in the 1890s. Little discoveries like this are what make historic homes still feel alive. According to the museum, JJ worked himself relentlessly, and in 1897 he suffered a stroke upstairs when he was just 42. JJ never fully regained his energy after that, and after his death in 1922, Margaret called him the finest man I ever knew, which says so much about their relationship and the respect they had for one another. This dining room was the heart of Margaret and JJ's entertaining life. Some of their biggest gatherings happened right here, including a famous 1910 garden party where Margaret invited over 800 guests. What's special about this room is that much of what you're seeing actually belonged to the Browns. Here in the display case are pieces of Margaret's original dinnerware. There's also china cabinets to the left featuring her silver and stemware collections. Many of these items were later donated by families who rented the home when she leased it fully furnished, which I love because it means these objects lived real lives and were actually used and cared for over the years. The table is set with her elegant gold-trimmed china, crystal stemware, and a lace tablecloth that feels perfectly Victorian Christmas. It's styled exactly the way a formal meal would have looked here, with place cards, courses laid out, and layers of silver for every part of the meal. This is the only photograph of Margaret in her home, which I find really special. It's so fun to picture her right here, organizing a dinner, adjusting a place setting, and making those last-minute touches any great hostess does before her guests start to arrive. Here we're in the Butler's Pantry, a tucked-away workspace that tells you so much about how the Browns actually lived and entertained. This entire built-in is original to the home, crafted in rich oak, filled with original pieces of Margaret's china and silver. They've also staged the pantry for Christmas, and I love this so much. The trays of fruit, nuts, and pastries that look so real and inviting. I can see why they have a sign telling us not to touch. And then over here, one of my favorite details, the Votes for Women china. This set is modeled after the china used at Alva Vanderbilt Belmont's 1914 suffrage conference at Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, the same event Margaret Brown helped organize. The kitchen is where you really feel the rhythm of daily life in this house. The space was run by the Browns' live-in housekeeper, Mary Fitzharris-Nevin, an Irish immigrant who worked for the family in Leadville and later here in Denver. Her job wasn't just cooking. She managed meals, washed linens, kept the fire going. She was the main one for anything that needed stitching, and she oversaw the constant flow of chores that kept a Victorian household running. The room is decorated for a simple Victorian Christmas, exactly how a working kitchen would have been decorated, with a small Christmas tree on the center table, adorned with handmade ornaments, oranges pierced with cloves, scraps of ribbon and fabric tied into bows, with little cookies and other baked goods sitting underneath the tree. It's charming, but it also feels practical, the kind of tree a busy household staff could assemble with whatever was on hand. On the far wall is a coal-burning range, where the meals for the entire household were cooked. You see lots of pots and pans and different molds, all ready to prepare for a holiday gathering. Through the doorway is the back staircase, the route used by servants to move between floors directly and efficiently. Just beyond that is the walk-in pantry, lined with original built-ins. The shelves are stacked with vintage canned goods, dry goods, storage jars, and kitchen staples, exactly the kind of supplies a family preparing for a Colorado winter would have relied on. Opposite the shelving is additional cabinetry, filled with everyday china and serving pieces. Next to it sits a collection of early kitchen tools and gadgets, and even a hand-cranked washing machine, with the metal tub and wringer still intact. This was cutting-edge convenience for a home of this era. Together, the kitchen and pantry show a side of the Brown home that's deeply human, a reflection of all of the hard work happening behind the scenes, especially during the holidays, and the types of different routines and tasks that were vital in running this household. According to the Brown family, this little west-facing sitting room upstairs, sometimes called Margaret's sunroom, was her favorite space in the entire house. This is where she wrote letters, planned fundraisers, and entertained her closest friends. It feels intimate the moment you step in. The first thing that grabs you is the glow from those stained glass windows. They wash the whole room in soft colors, and because they sit right beside that dramatic staircase, you really get a sense of the depth and craftsmanship happening here in this space. The staircase itself is incredible up close. Carved newel posts, geometric balusters, and all of those bead-turned spindles that feel so quintessentially Victorian. On top of the cabinet radio, the museum displays 2 letters from Debbie Reynolds, written in 1984. She played Molly Brown in The Unsinkable Molly Brown, and these letters are her personal reflections on portraying Margaret, how much she admired her, how meaningful the role became, and how grateful she was to historic Denver while preparing her book and exhibit. And that door in the corner opens onto a small balcony. It would have been the perfect little perch for catching those gorgeous Denver sunsets. This was Helen's bedroom, the Browns' daughter, who actually stayed behind in Paris to continue her studies while her mother boarded the Titanic to rush back to the US after hearing her grandson was really ill in Denver. The bed is a true family original, which the museum verified through old photographs. They've also added period-appropriate toys throughout, which makes the space feel so lived in, like Helen stepped away just for a quick moment to play with her friends. And just look at that ceiling. The curved pink border and the soft blue sky colors are so charming and so perfect for a children's room. The Browns also had a son, Lawrence Palmer. He spent most of his youth away at boarding school, and he eventually followed in his father's footsteps and attended the Colorado School of Mines. Lawrence enrolled in officer training. By 1918, he was serving as a captain in France with the American Expeditionary Forces. It's no surprise that Margaret and her husband had children that were just as driven as they were. This is Margaret Brown's bedroom, a place where she wrote letters, planned her political work, and later launched her 1914 campaign for Congress, becoming one of the first women in Colorado to run for federal office. Several objects in here belong directly to Margaret, including fashion accessories like her opera glasses engraved with an MB, her gold watch, and her jewelry. Little reminders of just how stylish and modern she really was. Other original pieces include her monogram stationery, items from her personal lace collection, and this early 1900s secretary desk that she used in her Newport cottage, which is here on loan from her great-granddaughter. And on the bed is a reproduction coat modeled after one she wore during her years in Newport. Together, these details help us picture Margaret not just as the unsinkable Molly Brown, but as a fashionable, educated, politically engaged woman actively trying to shape the future for generations to come. This room once served as a guest bedroom, but today it's really used to tell the story of what happened to the house after Margaret moved to Newport. She rented out this house to help keep the home afloat, and her first long-term tenant were the Cosgriff family. They lived here for nearly a decade, and Margaret worked closely with them to manage the household expenses and repairs. In later years, when taxes came due, she even traded pieces of her own furniture to Bessie as payment. Some of those original items have since been returned by the Cosgriff descendants. The room also introduces us to the home's final private owner, Art Leisenring, who transformed the house into apartments and rented out rooms, including the rooms for rent men-only era you see referenced here. When Art decided to sell the home in 1970, urban renewal threatened much of Denver's historic architecture. Neighbors and Titanic enthusiasts urged him to save the home, and he ultimately partnered with a small group of volunteers who would become Historic Denver. Because of their efforts, this house was restored room by room, and Margaret Brown's story lives on through this house because of their efforts. This space was likely the Browns' only full bathroom, and it remains as the most original room in the entire house. Almost everything you see in here dates back to 1889. The paneled woodwork, the early subway tile, and the beautiful original fixtures that have survived more than a century of use. And the Brown family even used this exact same bathtub. Up here in the attic, we're standing in what was once the living quarters for the Browns' household staff. It's a simple, tucked-away space that reminds us just how many people it took to run a Victorian home of this size. One room is staged to show a later chapter of the house's life, when it was used in the 1960s as a Jane Addams-style halfway house for young girls in Denver's juvenile court system. It's a surprising layer of history, but one that reflects the home's long tradition of service and support of women. There's also some additional Titanic displays upstairs, including ship plans and interpretive pieces that help place Margaret's experience in the larger story of the disaster. And finally, one of my favorite exhibits here, the Brown family genealogy wall, a newly researched visual family tree that traces Margaret's relatives across generations. It's such a thoughtful addition to the museum, helping visitors understand where she came from and the legacy she left behind. As we leave this house, it's easy to see why it continues to captivate visitors more than a century later. Every room reveals another layer of Margaret Brown's life outside of surviving the Titanic tragedy. A woman who traveled the world, championed education, advocated for workers and families, supported cultural arts, and pushed fearlessly into politics long before it was common for women to do so. Her life wasn't defined by surviving the sinking of the Titanic, but by decades of courage, conviction, and a determined commitment to helping others. I hope you enjoyed this festive tour of the Molly Brown House Museum, and I hope you enjoyed learning more about the unsinkable Molly Brown. Make sure to subscribe because I have extra house tours coming your way each week this holiday season as my Christmas gift to you all. Until the next one, my friends, keep celebrating the beauty of vintage home. Happy holidays.